This podcast is brought to you by the American Enterprise Institute.
If you like what you hear, please subscribe, rate, review, and share.
Thanks for listening. Here's our show.
What in the hell's going on?
What the hell is going on?
What the hell is going on?
I don't know what the hell he's talking about.
You don't have to know what the hell is on it.
What the hell's the matter with these guys?
We don't know what's going on.
What the hell's going on?
Who in God's name knows what it's all about?
Hi, I'm Danielle Pletka.
Now, Mark Thiessen.
Welcome to our podcast. What the hell is going on? Mark, is the election over?
No, but the nominating process is finally over. We finally have a race. Kamala Harris has chosen her vice president. She's had her convention. The race is on, and we've got 60 days, something like that.
Oh, my God.
And quite frankly, less than that, because people start voting in about a week or so in early voting in some of these states. The election's happening. It's not over yet, but it's getting close, Danny.
Yeah, well, it can't be soon enough for me. So we are talking to one of our favorite guests today, Karl Rove, who is well known to everybody, right? Political strategist, fundraiser, the architect par excellence. And we're just trying to figure out because, you know, I can never wait. I'm the person who reads the end of the book before I get to the middle. And I've now gotten in the habit on the TV shows we watch streaming to look them up on Wikipedia and see how it ends. So I just wanted Karl on to tell me how it's going to end so I can stop paying attention. How do you think it's going, Mark?
I think Karl is right. It's a toss-up, but it's Trump's to lose or Trump's to win, however you want to put it. We've never had a situation like this where you've had a nominee of a major party who has not gone through a primary, has not done a primary debate where they had to defend their positions. And, you know, usually the candidate like tacks far to the left in the primary debates in the Democratic Party in order to win the nomination and then tacks to the center. She's just tacking to the center without having to have defended her left-wing positions and gone through that. And then just comes in as like a cipher, an empty vessel on which everybody who was just despondent over the fact that Joe Biden was going to lose the election can now pour all their hopes and dreams into this empty vessel. And I mean that both literally and figuratively. She is in many ways an empty vessel. But, with 60 days in the election, she could skate through without being defined, it's Trump's job to define her and for the American people and explain.
And he's done a terrible job.
Yes and no. I mean, yes.
Yes, yes and yes.
Yeah, they've got a great ad up now. Karl mentions it, but it's a terrific ad showing her debating herself about the economy, where she says, prices are too high, gas costs too much, groceries cost too much, and then they flip over to the other screen. Bidenomics is working. I mean, what she is doing, which is unprecedented. She is the sitting vice president. Sitting vice presidents almost never win elections. The last one was George H.W. Bush. Before that, it was Martin Van Buren in 1836. And the reason for that is because people wanted both another Andrew Jackson and another Ronald Reagan term. And people obviously don't want another Joe Biden term, or else Joe Biden would still be the nominee, right? So she should be carrying the burden of being the sitting vice president to the single most unpopular president in the history of polling, going back to Harry Truman. And yet somehow she is pulling the political jujitsu act of campaigning as this fresh-faced outsider who is disavowing every position left-wing position she's ever taken, and is painting Donald Trump as effectively the incumbent.
So let me just say something counterintuitive.
Sure.
Good for her. I mean,
for lying to us?
If you can fool. Wait a minute. Hang on a second.
Okay. Explain yourself, Danny.
Now, again, I don't, as you know, I can't stand either of them. I'm a never anybodyer. I'm voting for the ghost of Ronald Reagan. But she is a woman who has got the monkey of Joe Biden on her back, the monkey of every stupid thing she ever said. And just by the way, that is the vast mass of things she has said, which are things that are stupid and do not bear repeating, right? Except that she also repeats them continually. And despite those burdens, she has managed to, A, leap ahead of Trump in the national polls. She's ahead of him in a bunch of critical states. Now, we don't know whether she's going to stay there. She managed to get through. Yes, Dana Bash was not as tough on her as she should have been, but she skated through a reasonably brief CNN interview without doing herself serious damage. I mean, damn. I wish I could say the same of Donald Trump.
Well, first of all, the fact that it's perceived that she skated through that interview unscathed is absolutely a indictment of our media culture today, because she was asked a question, what are you going to do on day one? And she was like, word salad, middle class, blah, 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 nothing. And then Dana Bash comes back at her and says, yeah, but what are you going to do on day one? And she still couldn't answer the friggin' question. How can you be a candidate for president 60 days away from election and not be able to tell people what you're going to do on day one? You ask Donald Trump, for better or for worse, he says, I'm going to fire everyone responsible for the Afghan debacle. I'm going to have peace in Ukraine. I'm going to make butterflies and candy for everybody in America. He's got specific things he plans to do on day one. How can you not answer that question? And how can that be perceived as a successful interview? How can that be perceived as a successful interview?
But Mark, you remind me in this, I think our listeners are well aware that I agree with you 100% that this is absolute bullshit. This is unbelievable, right? Okay, but I still remember a former colleague of Stevens when Donald Trump was elected who said, you know how this happened? Because the American people are stupid, right? That is not going to be the winner any more than saying the media sucks and is in the tank for the Democratic Party, right? So what? It's true, but it's not going to win this. And the problem for me is that I don't see Donald Trump turning around and doing the things that are necessary to hold her feet to the fire, to actually cause her to be accountable for what she did or didn't do as vice president, to hang Bidenomics around her neck, to do all of those things. Instead, as Karl rightly says, he's sort of busy musing about whether she's black or Indian, as if anybody gives a shit.
Well, he's got to do those things. I mean, he's got an ad up doing it. I mean, this debate is very high stakes. So next week is the first and only presidential debate, possibly only presidential debate. This could make or break Trump. It could make or break Harris. I mean, if she goes through that and just comes across as a blithering idiot, then that could kill her. And if Trump is the Trump who showed up in the debate with Biden, who's disciplined, lets her talk, lets her hang herself, and prosecutes a case against her, he could win it in that debate. Or if he comes in too hot, he could lose it right then and there. It really is remarkable how important this debate is going to be for the outcome of the election.
And that is why I am not going to see Tom Jones, and instead going to stay home.
That's Boy George and Squeeze that night.
Oh,
you're
crap.
not going to see Tom Jones because we're going to see Paul Weller on Wednesday.
Just in case everybody wondered what it was like.
As some of our listeners may know, Danny and I go to a lot of concerts together.
I still would love to see Boy George and Squeeze. I confess to you, but I'll watch the Kamala and Donald Trump show instead. Hey guys,
Boy George and Squeeze, Kamala and Trump. It's a tough call.
What have I done to deserve this? Hey, everybody knows who Karl Rove is. He has a column in the Wall Street Journal. He's a Fox News contributor. He is the former deputy chief of staff and senior advisor to President George W. Bush. He is indeed known to all of us as the architect of President Bush's 2000 and 2004 campaigns. He's written two incredible books, The Triumph of William McKinley and Courage and Consequence, both of which we commend to you. And he's just a great guy.
Here's our interview. Karl, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks for having me back.
Well, it was great to spend time with you in Chicago. We both endured that convention side by side. And now it's over and the race has begun. Kamala Harris is, according to Nate Silver, I don't know how much credence you give to his analysis, it's about a 57% chance that Trump wins, 46% that she wins. How do you see the race? How do you see this playing out right now?
Well, I thought it was interesting. He has her ahead, and yet he's giving the bump to Trump. She is ahead, but she needs to be ahead by a lot more given the Electoral College advantage that Republicans have. She is ahead by less than Biden and Hillary were at the close and way behind where they were at this point. But then this is an entirely different kind of a race. And so right today, I think it's a toss-up. It's his to win, but he's got to do some things in the affirmative in order to win. And if he doesn't do those, then she might not be able to win, but he might be able to lose.
First of all, it's great to see you again. Thank you, Karl. We love having you on. We hear the same thing a lot, which is, right, Trump can lose this. Would you just explain to our listeners, when you say that she has to win by more than a point or two to overcome the Republican Electoral College advantage, walk us through how that works.
Well, we have a number of states that are reliably Republican, which are small, like Wyoming, which has 3 electoral votes, one congressional district, but at 3 electoral votes, and same with North Dakota, South Dakota. And so Republicans have a little bit of an edge in the Electoral College. Yeah, California is big and has got the biggest chunk of Electoral College votes, and reliably Democrat. But, each one of those electoral votes in California represents a larger number of people than, say, in South Dakota or Wyoming or Omaha and Nebraska, Kansas, et cetera. So take a look at 2020. Joe Biden is ahead by 7 million votes and yet wins in the Electoral College by a relatively slim margin and by a relatively small handful of votes. I think it's 153 million total votes cast, and he wins by 42,000 votes in 3 states. In 2016, Hillary Clinton is, I think, 4 points ahead or so on Election Day, and yet she loses by 77,000 votes in 3 states. So, the record is pretty clear. She needs to go into Election Day, if this is like other elections, with a 4 or 5 point advantage, and even then it's going to be a squeaker in some of these battleground states.
So you say it's Trump's to win. How does he win it? Like if you're sitting down with Trump in Mar-a-Lago and saying, look, the race has changed now. You knocked Biden out. Probably a mistake to have that debate, if in retrospect. But now you've got a new candidate. It's a new race. We've never had a situation where we've had a presidential nominee who's never done a town hall, done one interview, never had a primary debate with the Democrats attacking her record, like just swoops in like a phantom and resets the race with now 60 some odd days to go. How does he win this? How does he prosecute this? How does he adjust?
Well, by recognizing what you just said. She was not scarred in the 2024 Democratic presidential primary because there wasn't one. Her biggest disadvantage is that she is the vice president of an unpopular president who will get more popular, incidentally, the further away he gets from being a candidate. One of the reasons that his numbers were so bad was that people looked at him and said, I cannot see that man serving as president for the next 4 years. He's too old. So the boomlet that we've seen for her is a palpable sense of relief. You and I saw this and we're talking about it in Chicago. I mean, they didn't know who she was and they didn't care what she was for. By God, they were glad to be rid of the giant yoke of Joe Biden, who was going to drag him down to defeat. So if he wants to beat her, then it strikes me he needs to do 3 things. First of all, he needs to be disciplined in explaining why she's responsible for the conditions that we find ourselves in as a country today. That means that you got to be specific. We got inflation. How do we get inflation? Well, Larry Summers and Jason Furman warned us, the Obama's economic advisors. They said, do not pass this gigantic, $2 trillion spending measure called the American Rescue Plan because it's going to set off inflation. And what happened? She was the deciding vote. It was tied 50-50 in the Senate, and she cast the deciding vote that put in place this measure that stoked the flames of inflation. Did the same on the so-called Inflation Reduction Act, unnecessary additional spending that created the classic condition of inflation, too much money chasing too few goods. So he needs to be specific. He can't simply say Biden is responsible for it. She's got to be tattooed with it. It's got to be made clear she cast the vote that caused the spending in those 2 bills, plus the gigantic plus up in domestic spending that occurred in the FY22 and FY23 budgets, which again required her to vote to break the tie to take up those measures. So He's got to be specific because they're simply saying Biden. People are going to say Biden was the president, she was the vice president, she really wasn't all that responsible. They're going to find excuses, and he needs to remove the excuses. Second thing is he's got to, in my opinion, show us he's got a second act. It is not enough to say, I'm going to make America great again. He's got to be willing to say, here are the big challenges. I've got a second act in me. Look, go back to 1992. I mean, talk about a successful foreign policy action, in the first Gulf War. And, George H.W. Bush is at 92%. But when it came down to it, they were willing to take a chance on the, governor of an obscure southwestern state, Arkansas, because he seemed to have an idea of what people were going through and had ideas about what to do about it. So second thing he's got to do is lay out a second-term agenda. And third thing is he has got to stop doing things that give the dominant media a chance to talk about things other than the big issues: immigration, illegal immigration, the border security issue, inflation, the economy, too big a government, not a strong enough defense. He goes off and says other things and count on the media covering those other things. He says, fill in the blank, something other than those things, and particularly if it sounds sort of crazy, they're going to go with it. And same with his running mate, for God's sake. I mean, of course, you can't hold him completely responsible today for the things that he said before. He's not going to be able to stop those from cascading out, but by God, get him on the same case and make the same kind of arguments to augment what Trump is saying or should be saying, and what will really do damage to her.
So one of the things that I confess I don't understand, and you've been immersed in this sort of political strategizing world for a long time. First of all, Donald Trump came out of the box extraordinarily disciplined. I think, I don't know whether you were gobsmacked, but I know that Mark and I watched as he went into that first debate and controlled himself, as he allowed the Democrats to debate the future of Joe Biden without sticking his big fat nose into their discussions, without derailing them. That was great, but it was as if he was, to use the cliche that I always use, he was the dog that caught the car. Joe Biden, the Democrats basically turned around and said, hey, Donald seems to be right. You've got to go. You're too old and lame for this job. And Donald Trump was caught completely flat-footed. I don't understand how this happened.
Yeah. Well, for about a year and a half, I've been saying whichever party figured out that it ought to offer a new face was the party that was going to get an advantage. And, we had the two most unpopular presidential candidates since we began polling on the question of favorables and unfavorables in the 1930s, for God's sake. So, yeah, it is a little bit surprising. But look, this has been an election full of surprises. The fact that, look, I thought Joe Biden would be bad in a debate. I really did. But that bad? Oh, my God. I almost had to avert my eyes. It was like seeing somebody committing political suicide every, 2 or 3 minutes. Taking a knife and slashing himself one more time. And I'm like, oh, my God, how did your wife and your sister and your son allow you to be put in this place? But having said that, you're right. I think Trump my sense was he was sort of amazed. I think he looked like, oh my God, this is worse than I ever thought it could be. And he stepped back. But now's the time to step forward in a disciplined fashion to go after her and to lay out an agenda and not to be, talking about these other things.
But do you think he can? I keep seeing kibitzing from the peanut galleries. Kellyanne, I still call her Kellyanne Fitzpatrick, but Kellyanne, telling him this is not an election that's going to be won by insults. Other people telling him, you got to talk policy. People who actually want to see Kamala Harris defeated, giving him advice. Do you think it happens? Do you think it can happen?
Well, it can happen. Think about the first 16 to 18 minutes of his speech at the Republican National Convention. We were, Mark and I were there. You could have, that audience was, the whole nation was just hanging on every word. And then we got crazy. We're going to solve cancer and Alzheimer very quickly, and men will not be allowed to participate in women's sports. And I'm thinking, Who put together that juxtaposition? And then I got a copy. There was, you remember, they didn't give out an advance copy of the script, but people inside Fox got a copy of the script beforehand.
Yes, we did.
And it was in there. What I think happened is he got a very good speechwriter who wrote the first 16 minutes and the last 8 minutes. And the, hour plus in between was just sort of what he wanted to say. And look, that was that was a lost opportunity. But the thing that really is hurting him is he goes to these rallies and says something extreme that says to the mainstream media, go ahead and cover that rather than anything else he said that might actually convince an undecided voter.
Yeah, that's the thing, is that he's so focused on feeding his base as opposed to persuading persuadable voters. I mean, I'm talking to the architect here, but my sideline view of it is that successful two-term presidents convince people to vote for them the second time that didn't vote for them the first time because they did so well, right? And so if you're Trump, what you want to do is the New York Times has been asking a fascinating question in the New York Times Siena poll, which is, has Donald Trump ever said anything to offend you? And they've been asking it every month. And 6 in 10 Americans either say never or not recently.
He's working to fix that, Mark. He's working on that 60%.
Yeah,
He's
so
going to touch them.
But so the first rule is don't give them a recent example of why you offended them. Like, just don't offend them, and then talk about the things that do appeal to them, which is your record, the things you did, how their lives were during your presidency.
Yeah, and what it is that you intend to do in the next few years that makes sense to people. I couldn't agree more. I mean, these things about attacking her, is she really Indian or black? I mean, that's not only wastes a day or 2 or 3, but it's offensive to people. And, we have 2 gigantic armies of people. One of them was dispirited and unenthusiastic because they knew in their heart of hearts that Joe Biden was too old. And the second group were wildly enthusiastic about Donald J. Trump because they liked what he did and how he handled himself when he was president. Strong, worked on the economy, times were good. But the people who are going to decide this election are people who started out saying, I really don't want either one of these guys, but I'm going to have to pick between the 2 of them. And now one of the 2 that they didn't like is gone, and they have a chance to fall in love with this vice president who seems to have a smile on her face. And at the Democratic convention, sounded like she loved America. And this was not Michelle Obama. The first time I was ever happy, proud of my country was when they nominated my husband for president. This is a woman who talked about, I was a prosecutor and, my job was to protect the little people. Kamala Harris for the people, that's how I introduced myself in the courtroom. This was well contrived, and Trump should not underestimate it. And he needs every single day between now and the election to be able to put a torpedo amidships that really matters. And calling their names and communist Kamala, et cetera, is not going to convince the undecided voter. Everybody who was moved by that kind of rhetoric is already in his camp.
Right. No, that's exactly true. I want to talk more about Kamala because I am still amazed that she has been able to replay the Joe Biden in his basement strategy when COVID is over. But let me just ask you about one of my, and dare I say also Mark's, hobby horses. How bad a choice was J.D. Vance? She said, leading the witness. Is that a bad missed opportunity?
Yeah. I mean, women who don't have children are somehow
Cat ladies.
worth less than, cat ladies. And he can't find a way to sort of say, well, I understand how people could take that the wrong way, but here's what I was trying to say. No, he says, if you don't agree with me, you're stupid. I mean, and I got to tell you, as painful as it is to watch Joe Biden, how about that visit to the donut shop? I mean, oh my God, it's painful. I mean, smart guy and well-spoken at times, but he has spoken badly in the past and can't find a way to sort of, soften the edges and move on.
Well, there's a reason why he won his seat. Rob Portman won by 20 by 5 points, and every other Republican on the ballot won by 20 or 30 points in the same election.
Look, I love Michael DeWine. He's been a great friend of mine for many, many years, but he's not Mr. Personality. And he's winning by 24 points, and J.D. Vance is winning an open seat by 6, And that's after a super PAC with which I was involved had to spend $38 million in Ohio to drag him across the finish line. So no, look, vice presidents, the good news for Trump is vice presidents don't, we don't elect vice presidents. We elect presidents. The bad news for Trump is that a vice presidential choice, if it's bad, reflects poorly on the judgment of the man at top. And so the guy who is suffering for all the indignations and weird things that JD says is Trump, because people are looking at him saying exactly what you said, Danielle. Missed opportunity.
How high stakes is this debate? Because, I mean, one thing that we've learned in the last two elections is that a single debate can win or lose an election. I think the first debate in 2020 cost Trump the election. He came in so hot, and there were just millions of people who looked at him and just said, I can't do this for another 4 years, and turned it off and walked away, and that was it. And we saw a single debate destroy Joe Biden. Yeah, I mean, this is pretty high stakes at the debate next week.
And look, we saw a debate that elevated a man to the presidency. Are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? And I think America can be a shining city on the hill again. Ronald Reagan in the single debate of the 1980 presidential campaign. You look at what happened among undecideds in that campaign after that one debate. You may not remember this, but do you know what one of the 10 battleground states of 1980 was? Texas. And I was the young kid who was the executive director of Texans for Reagan Bush. And the polling after Reagan in that debate, the undecideds just moved in block, because they said that guy looks like, sounds like, and is the president. And expectations had been raised for Jimmy Carter and lowered for Ronald Reagan. You remember they attacked him going into the debate as a right-wing troglodyte from California. Well, again, why are we lowering the expectations for Kamala Harris by comparing her to Biden and communist Kamala and blah blah blah? I mean, she's smart enough to raise the expectations for Donald Trump. As I was reading the memo that they put out on the weekend, he has participated in more debates than any presidential candidate in history. He'll be tough. I mean, that's the way. I mean, maybe we all look at that with a wink and a nod, but that's the way to do it.
Okay, so let's talk about Kamala for a second. This is a woman we know, okay? And for the last 3.5 years, the American people have looked at Joe Biden and gone, yuck, and looked at Kamala Harris and gone, double yuck. Okay, unburdened by what has been blah, blah, word salad, dingbat, cackling, the whole 9 yards, right? And all of a sudden, that's all gone. How does that happen? Can that last?
Well, it can last. That's the big question. It might be able to last 62 or 63 days. That's the problem. I mean, that's why look, in a presidential campaign, there are three big resources: money, issues, and time. You can always raise more money. That's not going to be a problem. Both sides are going to have sufficient resources. You can always go create more issues, but you can never create more time, which is why the days spent mocking her personally, which has no impact whatsoever on undecided voters, is such a mistake. And the days spent merely asserting things were better under me and I'm going to make America great again are insufficient. People need to be reminded in ways that they can get their hands around and say, he was right. And not only that, but he's given me enough sense that he knows what he wants to do that I feel comfortable.
So, Karl, you and I are old enough to remember when Roger Mudd interviewed Senator Ted Kennedy and asked him, why do you want to be president? And he couldn't answer the question. Well, Kamala Harris just was asked, what's your plan for day one as president? And delivered a word salad that said nothing. I mean, why is that not equally fatal to her as it was to Ted Kennedy?
Well, because the nature of the media has changed. We used to have sort of three big networks that we saw the visuals on, and we had our major newspapers all across the country. We had the beginnings of talk radio, but we had people who populated those outlets who believed their job was to present the facts. We used to complain about people like, Roger Mudd, but yet he asked the tough question. Dan Rather before he got to become a complete lunatic. And, it's no longer that way. I read these things, and it's not just politics where we're seeing the left sentiments of the people in the media. We're seeing it, for example, in the coverage of Hamas and Gaza. I mean, it's just shocking to me what
Unbelievable.
and look, we're seeing it in Ukraine too. But yes, the media is no longer the media that it was. Complain as we did in the 70s and 80s and 90s and 2000. The media today is qualitatively very different than it was back then, and all for the worse.
That's for damn sure. So, our own Rui Teixeira, and he was a great catch for AEI, and he talks a lot about the change to Democratic Party. We've talked about this with you as well, that it's basically become a party, a party of coastal elites and college graduates. And he has repeatedly, since Kamala ascended to the throne, he has repeatedly emphasized that the party is still not breaking through with those people who felt abandoned and turned to Donald Trump. This is an interesting question because obviously these are, to use, I can't remember who used this expression, was it George Bush? Known facts. These are known facts.
Yeah.
And yet, so is this, do you think that she can turn that around and actually get back in with that critical part of the Democratic Party?
No, I don't. But she can win the election without doing that. And that's why she's such a disaster for the future of the Democratic Party. I love James Carville. I hate to admit it on your program, but he's a friend of mine and I love him. And he's one of the weirdest human beings. We were sitting behind the stage a year or so ago, and he says, "God, you know what the problem with my party is? We got a lot of people like the German communists in the 1930s after Hitler us." And I said, "Well, James, I get where you're coming from, but I don't think you ought to call the progressive wing of your party German communists of the 1930s. And I know how you feel about Trump, but Hitler, calling him Hitler, just turns off a lot of people who might be open to you." He said, "Good point." About 30 minutes later, we're in front of like 500 bankers. He says, "You know the problem with my party is, well, there are a lot of people like the German economy." Oh God, not again. But look, that's the problem is that the Democratic Party, they might be able to win this election, but who thinks if they do win the election that by 2028 that the Republicans have a half a brain, that this won't be a rout? Because in essence, this is the second term of Joe Biden. Let's not kid ourselves. Second terms are never happy times. And the second term of a guy who ideologically was thought to be a transitional figure and instead tried to be Mr. Transformative, the most transformative president since at least Lyndon Johnson and probably FDR. Who is that an attack on? Barack Obama and Bill Clinton, that's who. And it was deliberate because, both his ego and the ideological preferences of a lot of people around him drove him there.
So this is a fascinating thing. I just did a column in the Post about how there's only been one sitting vice president in 188 years who won the presidency, and that was George H.W. Bush, and that's because people wanted a third Reagan term. Because generally when a sitting vice president, not as opposed to someone who's been out of office, but sitting vice president, they're voting on another term for the sitting president. And she has somehow is trying to jujitsu this into she's the insurgent and the outsider, and Trump is the one running for another term. And the media is going along with it. How is she pulling that off? Right? They've had control of the White House for 12 of the last 16 years. She's been there for 3.5 years, as you say, deciding votes on all the spending bills and everything like that. And she's acting like she's this fresh face that just showed up, and then Trump is the incumbent.
First of all, let me suck up to you. I thought it was a brilliant column.
Thank you.
I wish I thought of it first. And second of all, I think
it is rare that I do that with you with history because you are the political historian.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I'd say this. First of all, the compliant dominant media. Let's not hold her responsible for Joe Biden's mistakes. Second of all, most of what was said by Trump about Biden was his inability to be the president. That is to say, he was he'd lost it. He wasn't there mentally. He wasn't there physically. He was weak. He was feckless. But it wasn't a lot about the policies, only episodically. And third of all, remember, the last couple of years, she has not been a highly visible vice president. Vice presidents, are doomed to inquire about the president's health and go off to places where the president never wants to go. But she has been, I think, singularly less impressive as a vice president than most of the moderns. And as a result, she is able to come forward as a new, fresh face. And then particularly when she's running against somebody who is as dominant a personality for the last 8 years as Donald Trump, she is different and new, which is ironic. But he can still beat her, but it's going to require him to recognize that she's a serious contender and people are worried about serious issues and concerns.
So let's talk a little bit down ballot. Mark and I did a live podcast at AEI, and we had Matt Continetti, our colleague, and Amy Walter from the Cook Political Report, who we all love. Mark made everybody give their predictions at the end. Who was going to win what? Everybody then came down and said that Republicans were not just going to win the Senate, but that they were going to keep the House. Now, obviously, that and 50 cents will get you absolutely nothing. But how do you see the race for the Senate and the race for the House at this point in the election?
Yeah. So I believe absolutely the Republicans are going to take the Senate. And full disclosure, I'm involved with and was the co-founder of American Crossroads Senate Leadership Fund. But yeah, I think we will. I just finished doing a fundraiser in Montana while I was on vacation for Tim Sheehy, and Mike Rogers is a friend. David McCormick's a close friend. I knew Sam Brown when he was in Texas. I've done a fundraiser in Northeast Ohio for Bernie Marino. I've hosted my fellow Scandinavian, Eric Hovde, for an event in Austin. So I've gotten to see a lot of these people up close and personal. And yeah, we're going to take the Senate. The House, I would have been there in June saying the Republicans will keep the House because of the appearance on the scene of an improbable political figure, the Speaker of the House.
Right.
Mike Johnson, who has been a delightful surprise in so many different ways and restored a certain amount of civility and committee to not only the Republican caucus, but the House itself. It's hard to hate that guy. And so even if you're a Democrat, you can't hate him. And that's, I think, healthy for the system. I would say that the reinvigoration of the Democratic chances at the top of the ticket by the removal of Joe Biden after the first debate means the House is up for grabs. I do think the Republicans can take it. It'll depend upon what we call the orphan seats, that is to say the Republicans in New York and California. And it depends on whether we're going to be able to take advantage of some redistricting changes in Ohio and North Carolina that will be offset by redistricting changes in Louisiana and Alabama that benefit the other side. But whoever controls the House is going to control it narrowly. It's going to be for them or for us, a handful of seats. Of the 22 seats, I think this is the last time I looked at Amy's list, of the 22 toss-up seats, 11 of them are Democrat and 11 of them are Republican. So, we were going to keep the House before Biden's withdrawal, but we'll take the Senate and we have a shot at the House. But the Democrats are going to outspend us. It's amazing how much money Hollywood and Silicon Valley and New York liberals can generate. And so we're going to have to fight an uphill fight.
So you think we'll take the Senate even if Trump loses the presidency and we lose the House? We're going to win West Virginia, so we just got to pick up one of the 8 remaining, competitive seats to win.
I think we're going to win at least 2. I think we're going to win Montana and one other. I think Ohio is an excellent shot. And the best candidate we have on the field is Dave McCormick. I think Mike Rogers has turned into the happy warrior, loving campaigning statewide in Michigan and doing a good job at it. And then we have a contest in which only one party is running a candidate, and that's Maryland, where the Democrats are running Alsabrook. And the other candidate in the race is Larry, our governor. I mean, I'm shocked at his numbers. People do not see him in a partisan vein. He's Larry. He's the guy who made Annapolis work. Larry Hogan is the guy who beat cancer. He got rid of the stupid rain tax. When Baltimore was threatening to go up in flames, he had the guts to go there and calm people. I know him, people say. I like him, and he'll be a good representative of our state in the upper chamber. I mean, if there's one guy who, as a Republican, could win a Senate race in Maryland today, it's Larry Hogan, whose approval rating is 70, almost 2 years out of office.
So if we don't win the Senate,
we're in trouble as a country. If we lose the White House and lose the Congress, we're in trouble because they will do everything they can over the next 2 years to drive our country inexorably to the left in ways that are going to be difficult, if not impossible, to undo.
Well, Schumer has said they're going to get rid of the filibuster.
Yeah, get rid of the filibuster.
They're going to add District of Columbia as a state.
Pack the
They're
court.
going to maybe Puerto Rico. They're going to reform, quote unquote, reform the Supreme Court, which is the last bastion of protecting, our freedoms and constitutional rights. I mean, we could. I hate to use this phrase, but is this like a Flight 92 election?
93.
Please don't.
I know, but I
No,
mean,
no, but we got to control the Senate, win the majority in the Senate. I'm confident that we will, in part because of what you just outlined. Ordinary people do not want to put all their eggs in one basket, particularly if the basket is somebody who is ideologically rigid, like Kamala Harris is, or ideologically uncertain but troublesome. And I think thoughtful people will look at her and say, you know what, I may be willing to take a chance on you as president, but I want to make sure we got a break on you.
Last question from me, and I know it's late where you are. One of the things about Kamala Harris is she's been on the record about almost every left-wing fringe view she had. Now, you are right, we are right. The mainstream media has, she's changed her mind. Why has she changed her mind? How has she changed her mind? What's the proof she's changed her mind? Well, she said so. Right, so we know that. Well, in some cases,
An anonymous agent. Yeah.
Right.
So unnamed spokesperson.
Right. So
but
yes,
John
there are
Karl
a
goes
lot
on ABC News and says, "Oh, she doesn't believe any of that anymore." What are you talking about, Tom Cotton? Just give her a pass.
Right, but
Is he
nonetheless,
working for the campaign now? The Harris campaign, John Karl? I forget.
we all love
I like
John.
John personally. He's a good friend.
I
but
did
that
too.
Was,
He
that
was
was
a
a bad
good guy,
moment.
but that was
a bad
not a
moment.
good moment.
No.
Bad moment.
That was not a glorious moment in televisual history, but here's my question. You get around a lot more than elitist Danny Pletka, as Mark always likes to underscore. How are the Republicans doing in the states? They have got footage after footage after footage of her saying, ban fracking, of her saying, defund the police, of her saying, don't lock up criminals. All of the above. She's on the record in live Technicolor. Is the GOP running good ads?
Well, I saw a good ad on Bidenomics where she's, almost cackling about, Bidenomics is working. So yes, that kind of stuff helps. But again, what causes people is first, the people who are up for grabs think all the politicians change their minds. They look at them with a great deal of, sort of, I don't know if I can trust you. So what matters is there a pattern that is exemplified not simply by them having had an opinion in the past and a different opinion today, but something that causes you to fundamentally distrust them as an individual. I hate to fall back on it, but John Kerry, 2004. I actually voted for the $87 billion before I voted against it. That wasn't I changed my mind. It was I was playing politics. And I want you to play along with me. So I think you got to be careful. I'm not certain that it is. Look, she's going to be able to say on fracking, for example, yeah, she was running in 2019 and said, we're going to stop drilling oil and we're going to ban fracking. But now today she can say, I was vice president and I learned that she said it the other day, I learned that natural gas could be an important part of our move towards a green economy. So I would rather take the opinions that she has and the actions that she's taken that she's not walking away from and go after those. Look, on the border, she did nothing. She did not go to the border. She opposed adding until this year, and when it became a political disaster, she was opposed to all the things that we want to have done on the border. And the same on inflation. She was the one who provided the opportunity for the fires of inflation to be stoked. So I'd be careful about trying to make this, you can't trust her because she changed a bunch of opinions, because they think every politician changes their opinions.
Smart.
But that worked for Bush in 2004. Why isn't it work? I mean, she was against a wall before she was for it. She was against fracking before she was for it. She was for banning private health insurance. Now just like, it's literally, if Kerry was on a windsurfing, she's one of those crazy, those wind turbines that they want to build everywhere.
Yeah. The difference was he said it in one sentence at one time in the middle of the election.
Yeah.
She said something back then and something today. Now, granted, I think it's worth saying, particularly on the border where you can point to, but on fracking, they didn't try and kill it while they were there. I worry about, you got a limited amount of time. If this was 6 months or 9 months ago, fine, go after it and spend time. But they're out of time, and they got to go on things that are a political kill shot, not a glancing blow.
Yeah.
Wise advice.
My exit is just, you compare this where our friend John says, she doesn't believe any of that anymore, and lets her go on everything that they have audio and video of her saying. She can walk away from that. But Donald Trump owns every one of the 300 plus proposals of Project 2025 that he never endorsed and has repudiated. Like, why?
Well, you know, the answer to that is I've never read them and I never read anything. So you can't blame me. Blame J.D. Vance, who wrote the foreword.
Oh my
Well,
God.
and look,
Yeah,
again,
no.
you know what? 2025 is a mistake on their part. Nobody knows what that is. They're not talking to a single undecided voter when they're out there saying Heritage Foundation 2025. The people we're talking about here who are going to make up this interesting study, 4 minutes a week is what they spend on politics, the undecided and low propensity voters. So, you know, they don't even know what the Heritage Foundation is. You know, is that a fraternity of some sort? What is 2025? That's next year. Aren't we in 2024? Let them go off and do that kind of stupid stuff. Just I think he's had the right response on that. I don't know what the heck you're talking about. And the voters who are up for grabs are happy to say, I don't know what you're talking about either, and I don't care.
That's good advice.
That is
No,
good
it
advice.
is. You know, Mark, I mean, as much as we hate it because we live in Washington, that's right. Most people don't give a damn about this sort of conspiracy theorizing. They care about their pocketbook, the price of milk, the price of eggs, you know, and they're
And
right.
the future of their country.
Well, yeah. Yeah, that little thing. Hey, Karl, it's always such an honor and a pleasure. Thank you for sharing time with us, really.
Well, thank you again for having me on, and thanks for my good pal Mark, who literally we were sitting in a gigantic temporary building in Chicago reading the newspaper much of the time, and he was writing his columns. I sweat over one column a week, and this guy turns them out like every day.
Yep. He is prolific at that.
He's
He is
very good
indeed.
and very prolific.
Well, safe travels
I
around the
studied
country.
at the feet of the great one, Karl, in the Bush administration.
Yeah,
Take
there
care.
we go.
Safe
Thank you.
travels.
Thank
All
you.
right.
Appreciate it. All the best.
Okay,
Bye.
So, you know, I got myself in a lot of trouble with your employers at the Washington Post when in 2020 I said that I was worried about Joe Biden because I was afraid that the Democratic Party was going to end the filibuster, pack the Supreme Court, bring Puerto Rico and the District of Columbia into the Union, and otherwise screw up our nation as we know it.
They still want to do that.
Gee.
You were right then, and you're still right now.
Yeah, well, it was there, but for the grace of Kristen Sinema and Joe Manchin.
Who will not be there next year.
Right. Well, of course, we would have had Georgia if Donald Trump hadn't screwed that up for us. So it wouldn't have been as big a risk. But these are real things that they're contemplating. And people who used to be serious legislators, people like Chuck Schumer, are now saying, nope, filibuster is going to go. I don't know that, you know, kind of like we were talking about Project 2025, I don't know that people have thought about what an American government without guardrails would be like.
Well, I mean, the filibuster, and we've had podcasts on this that go in depth on it, which we can link to here. But the filibuster is literally the last institutional guardrail that ensures some sort of bipartisanship. Because you need 60 votes to get something done in the Senate. You can pass anything you want in the House by a simple majority. Whoever controls the House can get pretty much anything they want passed. But in the Senate, you got to get 60 votes, and that means almost never do we have a situation, very rarely, where one party has 60 votes, and so therefore you got to convince somebody on the other side to join you. And that's what enforces some sort of unanimity of some kind to get something done. The Democrats have openly said that they are going to get rid of it. And what does that mean? If Kamala Harris wins the presidency, they take the House and they take the Senate, they're going to get rid of the filibuster. They are going to add the District of Columbia as a state, which will give them 2 guaranteed Democratic senators in perpetuity, which means they will expand their majority by doing that, and possibly add Puerto Rico, which could give them potentially 2 more. And then we don't have a pickup chance, Republicans, for the next 2 elections. There's not a single vulnerable Democrat in the next 2 cycles. So the Democrats will control the Senate for a decade or more, and we may never be able to take back the Senate if they add 4 safe Democratic seats. And then what are they going to do? They are going to pass the Green New Deal. They are going to pass with a simple majority or some version of it. They're going to pass some version of Medicare for all. They are going to pass the Supreme Court reform that Joe Biden outlined the other day, which means that they will, basically cycle off the Trump appointees to the Supreme Court and cycle in a bunch of Democrats. That's going to get a constitutional fight, obviously, because I think it's unconstitutional to do that, to put term limits on Supreme Court justices. But, they're going to pack the Supreme Court. And so which will then rubber stamp all of their crazy agenda. They're going to pass his entire student debt bill that they had planned that they couldn't get passed to Congress before. And so he tried to do it by executive action, and the Supreme Court struck it down. Well, now they'll have the votes to do it. Every crazy left-wing idea that Kamala Harris laid out in her 2019 campaign that she is now walking away from because she knows they're unpopular, she'll pass them, and they will do it. And our country will never recover.
That's right.
I mean, truly, we're talking, everyone says this is the most important election in my lifetime. This is a turning point from which we will never turn back, because once they do that, we might not even be able to get back power to roll it back. In at least for the foreseeable future. And, Karl is optimistic that if they go too far that we might take back the White House, but we won't take back the Senate. And we may never take back the Senate, or certainly not for a very long time. And that means we can't roll back anything. And so it's going to be a one-way ratchet, and it's going to change our country forever, and it will make us into a European socialist utopia. So, I fully respect all my, you're a never nobody person. And I respect my never Trump conservative friends who don't want to vote for Donald Trump. But some of these people out there saying, well, I'm going to vote for Kamala because Kamala, because
There's a word for them.
Because democracy is on the ballot. Guess what? You're right. It's on the ballot, and they're the threat. Kamala and her ilk are the threat to our democracy. And, if you don't like Donald Trump, I say, choke down your bile, because if we don't, I worry that Karl is wrong, that if Trump loses the presidency, that we will not take back the Senate as well. We'll get to 50-50 with West Virginia, but we could lose all the other races. And that means if they win the White House, Tim Walz is the new 51st senator. This is high stakes.
Mark,
high stakes.
This is why we have an open bar at my election party.
There's enough alcohol in your bar to save America.
There you go. Famous words to live by. Everybody, thanks for being with us. Thank you, Sahar, for standing in for Ben as our producer tonight. And take care, everyone.
See you next week.
Let us know what topics you'd like us to cover. You can get in touch with the show by emailing us at whatthehell@aei.org.
Or you can reach us on Twitter. I'm at @dpletka.
And I'm at Mark Thiessen. That's Mark with a C.
Please rate and review the podcast. If you like the show, please subscribe, share it, comment on Apple Podcasts, or wherever you're listening to this.
Thanks for listening.